Hi, thanks everyone. It's great to be in Bangalore. I actually used to live here 20 years back. So at that time, it was a very different Bangalore, no traffic and all that. So anyway, so we've all talked about the Zoho way. I think a lot of you are now familiar with it. I should tell you one thing. Now, as part of Zoho way, we also believe that products, we basically don't stick to releasing a product just because we put the dates out there. So unless it's ready, it doesn't go out. Now keeping our current time frame and agenda in context of the Zoho way, that means that we're running a little late, but then we don't break for lunch until the presentations are done. Right? Right now, as we speak, the hotel staff is being trained on the Zoho way. So I hope everyone had a heavy breakfast, sorry. So knowing the Zoho way, I was prepared. So let me start. Yeah. All right, so I'll start with, I'm going to talk about product culture, right? How do you build a culture where you have a set of thriving products built by passionate people? That's what I'm here to talk about. So what's culture? So there are different interpretations of culture. There are different definitions and way people react to the term culture. So this happened in the late 60s, right? So there are some cultural trends. 60s you had the hippie movement, which basically people wanted to lead a much more free life, non-regulated life. So that was, people tied aspects of society and human behavior to culture, right? Moving fast, in the 70s, right, music emerged as a leading cultural icon. So people tied music, basically, which formed the base for the 70s rock culture. As we moved from the late 70s, there was a company that emerged which tried to tie technology to culture, right? It created a lot of exciting new products. Someone knows that. Someone's trying to sabotage this just as I finished my lunch. Okay. So this company tried to create a lot of innovative products and tried to come up with a lot, we all know what the company is, right? So it led to the rise of the addict, right? People who were addicted to products from this company, they were so passionate about products from this company, and they used to basically use all the latest and greatest applications. I know a lot of people have it in their, either hands or their pockets right now, right? So these are various aspects of culture and how culture affected several other events, right? Now let's talk about work culture, right? So when you talk about work culture, I'll do a little bit flashback to the 80s, talk about two major dominant economy in the 80s, right? So the first economy was, any guesses? Germany, right? A leader in precision heavy engineering. Anything, so if it was German engineering, you could trust it blindfoldedly, right? This is something that Sridhar also alluded to in his presentation earlier on, right? So this was one. So they perfected the art of engineering. In a 2004 study, it basically came up that Germans or German companies were the leaders in 68% of engineering categories. They were the leaders, they were the top companies who gave us brands such as these, leading brands that we all know and trust, right? So this was one kind of economy from the 80s. So this has a different type of culture. The next one, anyone? Japan, right? So the Japanese mastered the art of quality control to an extent that there was this almost obsessive focus on total quality and zero defects, right? So there was this principle of zero defects where you basically iterate, and until you perfect the product, get it to a zero defect level, you basically don't ship it, right? So these are the two economy, and then the Japanese also gives us something else, right? The philosophy of Kaizen, continual improvement. Change is good, embrace change. That's something that they gave us. So much so that it also lives on till this day. So if someone's familiar with IT, right, you're all part of the IT community. So ITIL, right? If you are familiar with ITIL, one of the founding principles of ITIL is continuous improvement, continual service improvement, right? That still carries on. So if you look at the market share of Japanese in the world in electronics, they had a leading foothold when it came to leadership in electronics, right? And they gave us brands such as these. Very powerful brand. Japanese brand stood for top quality, right? So and then in the 90s, saw the emergence of the software industry, right? So as you would expect, so we had these two leading economies in the 80s, very resilient, very smart people. Keep in mind, both of them were virtually destroyed in the Second World War. They came back from the brink of extinction to become the top 5 leading economies of the world. So you would normally people would expect that, okay, we've got the new software revolution coming in the 90s, and these companies or these economies and these countries would take leadership position when it comes to developing software, right? That would be the normal expectation. That didn't happen, right? So what really happened? That's what happened. Culture happened. So let me take a step back and let's go back to the old definition of what is culture, right? We started off with this. We didn't finish what defines a culture. So culture is basically the way how we view, how we engage, how we experience, how we react with the environment around us and with the world around us. So much so that it almost becomes a part of life for us, right? It's a way of life. It's a way that defines us, that becomes quintessential purpose of life for us. That is culture, right? And when you talk about culture, there are certain emotions, certain words that come in your mind, right? Things like passion, bonding, loyalty. These are all essential components or emotions associated with culture, right? And there's another thing that comes to mind when you talk about these emotions or these words, and that's cult, right? It's almost like creating a cult following when you have a certain type of culture, right? That's very interesting because both culture and cult have the same Latin derivative. It comes from the word cultus, which basically means worship. Well, in fact, originally the word did not have any connotation with any religious philosophy. It meant worship, it means you follow a certain philosophy and certain way of culture, right? That's what it meant. So let's look at, so you have, basically we've defined culture. So when it comes to work culture, there are certain common elements that work in all kinds of economy, be it manufacturing, heavy engineering, or software, right? So these common cultural aspects like learning, like innovation, like always being, Vijay talked about listening to your customers, being proactive are all common cultural criterias, right? But we're going to look at a different aspect of culture. Specifically, I'm going to talk about 3 dimensions of culture which are very unique to the software industry, right? So the first one is the product mindset, which is really the approach you have to take to building a software product company or a culture where you can develop software products. The second comes the people and team, which are really the core, your prime drivers behind developing all these innovative products. And the last one being the environment that shapes all, the way you develop these products, the way you interact with each other, how you basically come up with all these innovations, right? That's the work environment. So these are the 3 aspects or 3 dimensions of culture that I'm going to talk about in the rest of the presentation, right? Along with that, so Sridhar talked about, and he's going to give you 1 nugget. I'm going to talk about 15 nuggets, so that's a great bargain, I would think, right? So across these 3 areas of culture or 3 dimensions, I'm going to talk about 15 nuggets that highlight how and what cultural aspects are important and what Zoho has done in that context. So sharing our story in that context, right? So first one being the mindset, right? The approach, how do you develop a software product or evolve a software product company, right? So the first concept here I would talk about, or the first principle, would be the concept of a working software than a perfect one, right? Something that works. Now here's where the software industry is very unique, right? You have a concept of an MVP, minimal viable product, right? The reason I say it's very unique to the software industry is, I mean, take the automobile industry, right? You can't ship a car out, or you can't release a car just if it has 4 wheels and an engine. You need to have nice looking seats as well, right? Or nowadays you've got all these sophisticated things like airbags, like traction control, all these new features, right? So, and that applies to other industries as well. The concept of MVP is very unique to software, right? And the reason is, it's because software is a creative business. It's a creative way of, you're creating a software process. The other concept is, when you talk about MVP, the contrast between this and the automobile or the traditional industry is, you basically focus on a minimum set of product that meets the requirement functionally, you put it out, allow people to test it, give you feedback, fine-tune that, and arrive at something called product market fit, which can help you scale the business with that product line. So focus on that rather than getting the perfect product out. So that's how this software industry contrasts with some of the other industry we've seen. So let's look at our own evolution, right? So Zoho CRM started off as let me see if this works. You see the on-demand tab? So it started off as a tab on the AdwinNet website, right? So that was the first Zoho.com SaaS application that we put out. This was in 2005, right? So I'll fast forward 5 years, 2010, we added 25 new services under the Zoho umbrella, right? So that's like average of 5 new services a year, right? So how did we do this, right? How did we go from here to here? 5 years, right? One of the reasons is we actually kept coming up with new products. The first versions of these products were not perfect. We put out MVPs in various product categories. We put it out, tested it. A lot of customers gave us feedback. We found our own way. We learned from customers, and then we evolved. Right? So that's how we basically came up with these product lines. The other principle is basically the software being as closer to a craft rather than a factory or a manufacturing process, right? And the reason for that is the software approach is more of a creative process. You can't kind of templatize things and then say that I'm going to develop this product, this is how it's going to look. So when you talk about a creative process, the creativity comes from people. So software is created in the mind, right? It depends on how the person thinks and how the person builds the software. So it's very unique, and it resembles more of a design industry than a manufacturing industry. So it's very different from the traditional industry that we've seen. And when we talk about traditional industries, there's this, Japanese were leaders in statistical quality control, right? So why doesn't that apply here? Japanese, and this is an interesting story I probably should share with you. There's a very large telecom company that I've worked closely with, right, as part of Zoho. So they came up with something called defect prediction model. And they had Six Sigma and all those. They had the black belts and the masters in quality, right? They were trying to predict how many bugs would be in your system based on how much lines of code you had, right? So that's where they came up with all these different interesting metrics, right, which made absolutely no sense for us. Because we don't believe that lines of code reflect the quality of code, because the lines of code that a person A would write would be very different from what a person B would write, which cannot be comparable, which means you cannot metricize that and you cannot equate it, right? There's again this element of individual creativity that bears different results, right? So that's why you can't have accurate prediction models. It won't work in software, right? However, you do have to measure bugs in your software, right? So that's why we have tools like the Zoho tracker or the bug tracker, which helps you track bugs. So you should be able to track. There are other metrics. So you basically judge the quality of the software based on the product quality, which is what your testing process is going to tell you. Right? So next aspect I'm going to talk about is the culture of experimentation. Now, Zoho is very big on this because a lot of things that we do started off as experiments, right? So let's look at this example. So do you see anything common between all these different elements? Human hair, peacock, cedar, amber, tungsten, deer horn, anything, any similarity? Give you a hint. You're right. All these were various components or experiment used by Edison in the creation of the bulb, the light bulb, right? So it again ties back to this principle of do experiments. The experiments are going to tell you whether something is going to work or not. And keep the experiments small, meaning try a small experiment, don't invest a lot of effort and time and money into it, so that you get a chance to see whether it works. If it doesn't, you get a chance to course correct and you fail fast. That's basically culture of experimentation, right? So why is it important, right? One of the things that I think all of you would agree is experimentation is the foundation of innovation, right? Unless you experiment and try out, you won't know. A lot of innovations are basically ideas that you have to try out. Some may work, some may not work. So I'm going to give you an example here. So from our own Manage Engine division, right? So Raju and Sridhar talked about the early history of the company. So Manage Engine today has products in these various categories that serves the enterprise IT administrators in any company. But early on, this is not what the product portfolio looked like. We had these three product categories that we had that didn't work out, and which we found out by experimentation because we didn't know it up front, right? So we tried it, it didn't work out, and we phased it out. Right? Let me give another example from the Zoho.com business line. I apologize for the lot of text. So what this basically tells you is there are some Zoho services we believed that didn't work as we expected, that did not see the demand from the market, and we have to pull it back, right? And Sridhar's note here, bottom, basically summarizes. So it says that we are sad to see these products go, but this is something that we don't know upfront. We are a risk-taking company. We like to experiment, right? The next philosophy, the next element of culture I'm going to talk about is change. Change is, as everyone knows, is inevitable, right? So embrace it, or what I say, better still, be the change. Be the one who introduces the change in the system and disrupts the market, right? Change can be a great disruptor, and we'll look at why. So I'll give you two examples here. One from our own Zoho experience, and the second one is from an outside industry experience. So here again I draw inspiration from our Manage Engine division. We have a popular product called the Service Desk, available in different flavors, different editions. One of the edition was a standard edition. One of the experiments we wanted to try was, and there are so many players, let's introduce a change in the system. Let's make it free, absolutely free for life. All you need to do is click on that button and get a license and download the product. This is an installed product, by the way. And you could use the product free for life. No strings attached. Right? So when we did this, this was a result. I just want to share some of the results, right? Just from the free edition, we saw close to 350,000, 3.5 lakhs of people, technicians, using this product. Free edition, 101 organizations, companies from world, and that gives you a geographical split of where those companies are located, adopted it, and there was one free license going out every 30 minutes. So that is the impact that this change had, and it was up to us to do it. There was no compulsion. And this was basically not the entire, this was one edition of the product that we did, right? The next example from an outside industry, non-Zoho example I would give is, let's look at the state of mobile handsets in 2007, right? So in that year alone, there were over 150 models, new models introduced. So let's look at these, who are the leading players in those times, right? So you had Nokia, who was a leading player. They came up with the N95. I remember because I used to ogle at it. Very nice looking phone, right? You had all these nice looking icons, graphics you can interact with, and you had the slider. You had a QWERTY keypad, right? That was one. Another entrant was the HTC Dream. This again had a slider, QWERTY keypad. This took a lot of inspiration from the BlackBerry, who was a leading player in those times, right? So they thought that they were coming out with a completely new way of using the mobile. Guess what happened? Change, right? And we all know the rest is history, right? So these are two examples of change that I wanted to give. Now moving ahead to the next point, right? Optimize for speed and then think about efficiency, right? Which means move fast, get the product out. Don't try to put the perfect process in place, right? So what that means is, anyone knows what this is, the image. This is the largest ship ever built. It's called Knock Nevis. It's basically close to a half a kilometer in length, the size of 4 football stadiums. It also, that's one interesting angle, right? So if you have to stop this ship, you apply the brakes, it's going to take you 6 kilometers. It's going to go further 6 kilometers before it stops. So which means you have to plan in advance when to stop this. There's another interesting aspect to this. It's about changing direction. So if it has to do a turn, it's going to take a radius or a turning circle of 3 kilometers, right? So let me give an example here, right? Speed versus process, right? Here within our own Zoho example, the products came first and then came the processes. If we had waited for putting all the process in place, we would have never been able to ship all these products. So let's move on to the second aspect of the work culture, that's the people. Very important, right? So this is one philosophy we always believe in, right? In a lot of cases, someone asked, right, how do you come up with new products and all? Some of the times we put smart people on it, and they figure out. They figure the solution. And another way is, right, how do you decide to do so many products, right? One of the ways, you also always have to keep people challenged. People have to be challenged. That's a great motivation, right? It gives you great satisfaction. So this actually works well for everybody. As long as people are conscious and they can get things done, they're smart, motivated, let them do that. Here's an example of putting the, as they say, putting the cart in front of the horse, right? So at Zoho, we don't actually define the work, we don't actually go and say that these are the people who's going to do this work, right? We don't go looking for a specific skill to fit a specific work. The skill can be learned by anybody. So you basically go and define the work. What is it you need to build? And then you assign people to it, people who have the right attitude and the smarts to do it, and they will figure it out. So next couple of slides we come into very interesting, which are something that we've very strongly believed in. Domain knowledge, right? If you look at it, right, a lot of things that we have done over our history, we never knew how to do it, right? We never had the network management knowledge to start with. We never had the enterprise IT management when we started Manage Engine. And we certainly didn't know how to build a CRM or Zoho books. These are some things that we learned over time. Right? So domain knowledge is overrated. It can be learned. So we've never felt the need to go and hire a domain specialist who will tell us how to do that. No, that is something I believe people can learn. So that comes back to a phrase that Sridhar often talks about, nobody knows nothing, right? So nobody knows nothing means, a lot of times we don't do something because we feel that the others, someone, your competitor maybe knows it better than you. And that stops you from doing it. That's never stopped us from building products, because you go with that philosophy of nobody knows nothing, you're in good hands. The next one is credentials. So Sridhar talked about this a lot, right? A lot of people will talk about. So disclaimer is, I'm not an MBA. I'm not from IIT, right? So credentials, right? So credentials over attitude and hard work. So let's look at credentials at Zoho, right? So 3 people from IIT, you already saw this. 1% have, less than 1%, probably 0.5% have a master's degree. And I think Sridhar hinted to this as well. 15%, less than 15% have, around 300 to 350 people have gone to college. Right? My colleague Rajendran has a detailed session on this when he talks about Zoho University. Right? The next thing I'm going to talk about is small team, big productivity. Right? So what does that mean? So we'll look at the example, the same example of the knock novice versus small, fast-moving, speeding boats. Right? So here, basically, like I said, it takes a 3-kilometer turn versus it's very easy to change directions with small speeding boats, right? And in the software industry, agility can win markets. Speed can be a great disruptor. If you're early to market, you can go and capture a market share, right? That's an example from us. So what we realized is when we were building the WebNMS line of products, the biggest product, the WebNMS platform, was 200 people at its peak, right? And some of the decisions that we make can be very slow because so many people have to be on board and it's very difficult to change direction. So one of the things that we did when we diversified from WebNMS to Manage Engine was not only cater to a different market, but also internally build the teams very differently. Small teams, which can move very fast, change directions very fast, That is the philosophy we adopted, and that basically worked out very well for us. So here's another thing about small team, big productivity, right? Throwing people, so we are all familiar with this problem here, right? So we've all studied it in school or college. If it takes Rajesh 13 hours to paint a room, Pradeep can do it in 8 hours. If we put them together, how fast can they do it, right? So throwing people at the problem doesn't work. The other thing associated with large team, big teams is big teams are difficult to manage, right? I mean, this is something that we realized, which is why intentionally we've kept teams small. But we also know there are other companies who have found the solution to this, right? How do you manage big teams, right? So our take on this is keep the team small, and as long as the teams are small, they are self-managed. You don't need someone to basically give instructions or monitor something. So this is an example of a tool we use internally. It's called Zoho Projects, right? So we basically, everyone keeps updating the projects on what they're doing, and it's also a collaboration tool. They can share information with others. If the developer tests something and gives it, this is certified to go out, the QA guy can come in, pick it up, and then do the system testing on that. Things like that. Great collaborative tool. You don't need people to facilitate the communication within the team. And everybody knows what the other team members are working on. So you don't have to go and ask somebody. It's right there. at the click of your own mouse, right? The last aspect I'm going to talk about is the work environment, which is really the supporting structure for your culture, right? What's the kind of work environment that you create, right? So the first thing here is be restless. Be restless means always be looking out for new products, new revenue stream. How do you basically, if you've done this, and like in our own history, right? When things came to a standing halt with the WebMS days, we had smart people. We had to think what next, right? So always think of what next. Similarly, when the cloud was an emerging factor, we had to think what next. So you got the cloud, what next? So we have these 3 product lines, right? But that still makes us think. So we basically saw that Manage Engine was serving the enterprise IT market. Zoho was a software as service application on the cloud. What does the cloud as a trend do to the enterprise IT market? What does it do to systems management, right? So this is the question we asked ourselves. And that led to a couple of new products. One was, we realized that there are going to be several SaaS companies who are going to launch the business on the internet. So you need monitoring for those SaaS business, right? That's where the idea of Site 24/7, which is a website monitoring tool, hosted, launched, it comes into picture. The next tool was our own help desk, which was available as an installed product. Take it to an on-demand deployment model, which means a SaaS service desk available for the enterprise IT crowd. Right? So this came out of our own questioning of, okay, what next? What is it we can do? How does this trend affect this market? So the next element of the culture I'm going to talk about is mistakes, right? And that's an interesting quote there saying that it's better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. This is actually true in our case because a lot of experiments, when you have this culture of experimentation, you encourage people to experiment. They don't have to come and tell you or ask you, I'm going to do this. Which is why I say that, when you talk about culture of experimentation, right, never expect ROI. People talk about ROI, right? ROI is actually, we don't believe in it. If you put an effort on an experiment, don't have expectation. It could go either way. It's an experiment, right? How do you know if it's going to work out or not? So don't have ROI expectations on it, right? About mistakes, right? Bill Gates had this interesting quote that he likes to hire only people who've made mistakes and who have failed because that can be a great teacher, right? And we learned from our own experiences. So remember we talked about this experimentation where we were seeing how does the cloud affect the systems management market. So we put out Site 24/7, but then before Site 24/7, we put out this product, which was our network monitoring product on the cloud. This was an experiment, right? It didn't work out. But then we learned from here, and this is what led to the Site 24/7 product. There was a lot of learning from here, which told us network monitoring is not rightly suited for the cloud environment, but application monitoring is. And we took that learning and changed directions. The next element of the work environment is the team chemistry. Now, I cannot stress this hard enough. So, one of the philosophies we have in Zoho is basically, you can go, if you're an engineer, right, or anyone, you can go and ask for a team change. If you feel that you don't gel with your team, you're free to ask for a team change. Because what matters most is whether every team has a certain DNA, right? It's not as though that person is not performing in that team, he's moving to this team. The person's DNA or style of working is suited to a certain team, right? So you can say that, I'm moving to that team, I work well with that manager, the work style, and that's basically encouraged, because unless people are comfortable or they move with their DNA matches the team DNA, they won't be productive, they won't be happy. That's why it's very important. This Anyone has guessed this? Is an example from the 2014 World Cup, right? We've seen how team performance trumps individual performance, right? So that's an example. So team productivity is very important. So people talk about teams that are geographically distributed, right? I've got a team in the United States, I've got a team in Israel and India. Now what we believe is the team is, when you talk about a product team, right? You've got various aspects of a product team. We believe that team is the smallest indivisible part of the product, which means if you fragment that, you're going to fragment the entire thinking that's going to be put into developing the product. And that doesn't work well for products, right? So geographically distributed team, it actually works against the product productivity and the way the product is going to come out. You may have a completely different marketing team somewhere else or a customization team somewhere else, but the core product team has to be together in one place. And that's the reason why we basically stay in one place. We don't believe in scattering teams across. Right? We do have teams in Tenkasi, but that's in a different place in Tamil Nadu, Tenkasi, right? It's a completely self-sustained team. That's an entire team. So you have people from development, from testing, to product management, to design, everybody's there. So the entire team sits there. So that's how you can split teams. But you can't split inside one team, certain group of people there and certain group of people here. The last point I'd like to make is about the environment, is the work culture and the hierarchy, right? So it's a very flat hierarchy that we've adopted. We've kind of abolished titles. It all depends on the role that you perform in the company, right? So one of the key things is ideas can come from anywhere. So here's an example I'd like to give. This is taken from our internal forum. So we have something called Zoho Connect. It's like a social network tool within company. And anyone can post ideas. You can talk to anybody. And this is a great way to communicate within the company. So here you can see, and in addition to that, on every Friday we have something called open house, where anyone can post an open house question for Sridhar, and he can respond to it. But then, apart from open house, it's basically a communication, the culture to question everything, right? Why is this way? Why is this that way, right? Or to ask, why not this? Why not that? So every time we had this inflection point, if we didn't ask those questions, it would have been very difficult for us to survive today, right? Those were moments of survival for us. So you have to ask questions, or you have to create a culture of questioning everything, right? So here's a trivia for all of you. What's a great way to build a culture? I just want to test if everyone was paying attention. Any guesses? There is none. Some of you are absolutely right. It is you. It depends on how you define the culture, because culture shapes the way we interact with our own atmosphere, people around us, world around us. It depends on you. Thanks, everyone.